Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video we are going to take a look at how to render a really high quality movie sequence. In one of my previous video about real-time ray tracing lighting in Unreal Engine, I got a question that was, when we crank all these real-time ray tracing options, the system gets bogged down. You really lose performance by using dynamic lighting. So how are we going to render a good movie when doing this? Well, here is how to do it. I'm going to show you how to render a movie sequence with high quality, with a lot of setting cranks up that are going to be independent of the performance that you were getting inside the viewport. Now, this works by using Unreal as an offline rendering engine. If you have worked with other rendering engines like V-Ray, like Arnold, or Light Cycles, you probably know what I'm talking about. But for those of you who don't, an offline renderer is something that you just set up your scene, you hit render, and you leave it alone. It doesn't have to do anything with real-time performance, and usually when you're in those types of renderers, you're not seeing the final quality image until it's done render. So it kind of takes its time, it processes the image, so it spits out a really nice looking sequence. This is what we're going to be doing with Unreal. We're going to be turning this engine into a rendering machine. This is a process that's going to be taking time. So bear that in mind. This is going to hog up all your GPU, so your computer will be really slow. Don't freak out about that. It's supposed to happen. In this video, I'm going to go in depth into all the variables and properties that you need to take into account when doing a high quality render. So make sure you grab a snack and watch this video all the way to the end. Alright, before we get started, remember the best ways that you can support me is by leaving a like, leaving a comment, share this video, subscribe if you haven't, and ring that bell for notification. That really helps me out. Okay, so the things that you're going to need for this is Unreal Engine 4.25 and onwards. I'm not sure this works on previous versions. I'm positive it doesn't. So make sure you just have 4.25. Now remember, we're going to be doing real-time ray tracing, so make sure your video card is compatible with that. The third thing is going to be something called TdrDelay. Now, TdrDelay is this thing over here. So it's a registry option, which is right here. And if you are a Substance Painter user, you're probably very familiar with these variables, because whenever you start Substance Painter, if you have not done the modifications to these variables, it will give you a message that's really annoying every time. So we need to modify this because the TdrDelay is the amount of time that Windows gives to the GPU to respond. So if the GPU doesn't respond in a certain period of time, then Windows crashes the driver, and if the driver crashes, so will the engine. So if you have not done this, please stay with me. We're going to do this together, and I'm going to guide you through it. If you have already done this because you have Substance Painter or another program that uses this, you can skip to the next timestamp in the chapter. Now, for those of you that are staying, you may or may not have this option right here. So if you do not have that option, the thing that you have to do is right click, new, get into DWORD 32-bit value. Now I'm not going to do that because I already have it here. It's going to give me an error because it's already there, but it has to be DWORD 32-bit value. Once you've done that, it's going to create a registry onward like this, and you just name it exactly as it is right here. I'm going to leave some links in the description that talk about this in case you need some help with that, but make sure it's exactly written the same way that I have it right here. Otherwise, this is not going to work. It has to be the same cases for the T and the D. Now, after you have done that, you just double click here, and you're going to get this little window. And in this window, you're going to go into decimal, and you're going to make sure that this is all the way up to 60. What we're telling it here is wait 60 seconds before you crash the GPU driver. From what I've read, this process only requires you to modify this variable, but since I also have this one, might as well do it. So just double click it, go to decimal, and make sure it's at 60. And if you want to bring it in, it's the same way as the TDR delay. It's going to be also in the link that I'm going to leave in the description if you need more help with that. Now that you have made those changes, you need to close this and you need to restart your computer, otherwise the changes are not going to happen. All right, now that we've gotten that out of the way, one thing, if you want to follow along, you can always go into the Epic Launcher, Unreal Engine. The Learn tab should have this exact same project that I'm using. Now, some people have told me that sometimes this project's not here. And this is a project that was commissioned by Epic, so there is no reason why it shouldn't be here. It's actually under engine feature samples. The reason is because this project was made to showcase RTX. So if you want to follow along, make sure you grab this project right here and you have exactly the same things that I'm going to be showing. Okay, so after that, we are going to open our sequence. Now, the way we open our sequence is we go here into cinematics. We click this drop down menu. If you're using the same file, the same project that I'm using, you should find it here. If not, make sure you create your sequence first with your cameras, however you liked it, and then proceed to the next steps that I'm going to show you. But for now, if you're following along, just click on ArchViz CineMaster. Okay, now that we have our sequencer opened, if you're following along with the same project, you're gonna see that your viewport just went black, and the reason for that is because this sequence is set to start with a little fade in, and that's going to then turn on the lights and show you everything. You might be seeing that's a little bit choppy on the video because I'm recording at the same time and this has the highest quality settings possible. Now, if you are not seeing what I'm seeing right now and you want to get to that, all you have to do is press this little camera right here. That will take you straight into the cameras for the sequence, and as you can see, as I scroll, it jumps from camera to camera. There you go. All right, I just wanted to show you that, and this is the sequence that we're going to be using. The way that this used to be done before the movie render queue, which is what I'm going to show you today, is you were supposed to go here, you click here, and this will give you a set of options. You would set up your options and you would export your movie. The problem with this is good for the in-game cinematics. So if something is happening within your game and you want to have an in-game cinematic at that moment with some dialogue, this is the tool to use. But if you want to have like a game trailer, if you want to have a automotive showcase, something ArchViz, or simply you want to do something for your portfolio, this will be kind of like the low quality one. You will have to use the movie render sequence that we're going to be talking about here. I just wanted to show you what used to be the previous option. Now that we got that out of the way, what I'm going to go here is on Window. You're going to see that it says Cinematic. And over here we have Movie Render Queue. If you're on 4.25, you should be able to see this. But if by any chance you open this and you don't see Movie Render Queue, all you have to do is go to Settings, go to Plugins, and in Plugins we're going to look for Movie Render Pipeline. And also, even at this version, this is still in beta. I don't know if it's going to be final release on 4.26, but this may have some bugs, so that's why you'll see me avoiding certain options, just so we can get a high quality without any problems. So just bear that in mind. So once you have enabled this, if you didn't have that, all you have to do, let me close here, and we're gonna go here into Movie Render Queue, and we get this little window right here. So this window is where you're going to do everything that you need, and this is also the window that I'm going to be using to show you how to render super high quality images. Now, in order to use this, all you have to do is go here on the render and select your sequence. So if you are doing a one shot So let's say if you're doing just one picture, you're not gonna do video, you can have your sequence and make it be one frame. That's fine, but you still need a sequence for this to work. So I'm gonna click there, and you're gonna see that we have the name of the sequence, we have some settings that we're gonna talk about, we have the output. So this is where you will be clicking once this is done, so you can get into the files, and we have the status. So after that, we're going to go into the settings so we can see all the options that we have for this. So once you click settings, you are going to be greeted with another window. And this window is where we are going to add all the options necessary. This is also the window where you're going to find your presets. Now we have this preset tab. This preset is, once you have all your settings, you can save those settings so you can reuse them over and over in any additional movies that you want to render. And those will be saved as an asset for the project. So they will not be available to other projects unless you migrate them as an asset. Just bear that in mind. And if I open here, you're going to see that I already have some because this is the presets that I created while I was using this. But here you have save as preset, so you can save all your settings once you're done. Now over here, you just have the bare minimum that you need for render, and this is not going to get us a high quality render movie like we want. So one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the JPEG because I don't want to use JPEG. If you have watched my other videos, you know that I don't like JPEG because it's too compressed of a file. The file that I like to use is PNG. PNG is like that happy medium between good quality and decent compression. So for this, we are going to turn this off because these are toggles. And we're going to add more settings. So if you want to add more settings, just click the green button and you're going to see everything that you have available to you. So right now, let's start with anti-aliasing. Now over here in anti-aliasing, we have a couple of things that we can modify. In these settings, we have spatial, and you actually can hover over this and it will tell you what this should do. But what we're going to be using for this example is going to be the temporal. The reason why we're going to be using the temporal is because this is the one that I've seen more recommended whenever you are doing your video. The reason for that is because it works with motion blur, and you want motion blur to create those more realistic video takes. So in this one, what you can do is you can increase the samples here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to increase them all the way to 6. And the settings that I'm going to show you are the settings that I used to render the video that you saw in the beginning. You can crank this up if you want, but I'm going to tell you right now, if you crank this up, this is going to take super long. So we're going to leave it at 6. You can lower it if you want to, if your lighting scenario allows you to. That's why maybe render a couple of frames for some testing, just so you can test the amount of noise. This temporal sample count anti-aliasing, what's going to do is diminish the amount of noise. If you use offline renderers like V-Ray, like RenderMan, Arnold, whatever, then you are used to the sampling count. So the sampling count will bring down the amount of noise that you see on the scenes. Now, you don't have to crank this up so much in Unreal, like unlike other rendering engines, but for now we're just going to leave it at 6. We're going to override the anti-aliasing because there is an anti-aliasing in this scene already, and if you have anti-aliasing in your scene, it's better that you work with these samples right here. Now for the anti-aliasing method, we're going to go with none. We're not going to choose on other option because during my research, what I found is that this is the best option for this. Since this is a beta still, it's not recommended that you use anything else, although you can try and experiment. I really encourage that. Now the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to click on this drop down and you're going to go into the render warm-up count. You're going to put that to 32 is fine. So let's talk about what this is. The warm-up count is the amount of frames that the engine is going to render and then discard in order to get all our effects running. So if we actually go here, and let me get these out of the way just to show you something. So if we go into perspective, you're gonna see that when I move, there's a little bit of noise that is generated. And that is because it's the real-time ray tracing doing its job. So it fires rays, and as the time passes, it denoises it, and it gets rid of all those little kind of like splotches that you see all around. It may not be noticeable in the final video, but there is some noise when you move in this scene. So that is what the warm-up is for, is to give the engine some time to kind of get there and get all the effects and everything that's going on in the scene going before it starts to render. Otherwise, you're going to be render a fairly noisy scene. All right, the second variable that we have right here is called engine warm-up count. So the engine warm-up count, it has to do with the visual effects. So if you have any dust particles in there, something Niagara related, any animations, anything related that way, you are going to want to give this the same amount of time that you are giving the value above, or maybe higher, depending on how many particles you have. The other time when this is important is when you have, let's say, an exterior scene and you have a landscape and you have a lot of grass. Usually the engine takes a little bit to compile, and that grass needs to be rendered. So this is also giving the engine a little bit of time to get going and make sure that everything is ready for your awesome video. Now we're gonna go into settings again, and the next thing that we're going to do is actually, let's do PNG sequence. So here are the choices that you have for your render. You have BMP, which is kind of like an old 8-bit file. You have PNG, which is the one that I mentioned before and the one that we'll be using in this tutorial. And you have EXR. EXR, it's like the highest quality file. It's going to give you a 16-bit file that you can take into programs like DaVinci Resolve, After Effects, or Premiere, and you can color correct, or if you want, you could do it in Photoshop. Later, when we're doing the image, I'm going to be doing an EXR, so just so you know that this is an option here, but for now, we're going to be using PNG sequence. One of the things that you're noticing is there is no video file here. So if you have rendered with an offline renderer before, or even if you have used Marmoset Toolbag, you know that it's better to always use an image sequence as opposed to video. The reason for that is because if you are, let's say your video takes 500 frames and you are rendering a video instead of a sequence of images. If you render those 500 frames and it crashes at frame 499, you will have to restart from the beginning if you render it as a video. But if you render as a PNG sequence and you crash at frame 499, then you can just render frame 499 and beyond and be done super quickly. So this is why you would prefer to render in a PNG sequence and in an image sequence, and the engine's not going to give you any other choice, so might as well take it. So we're going to do PNG sequence, and the next setting that we're going to add is we're going to be adding a console variable. Now, in order to get rid of this little warning right here, it wants us to do 8 samples at least. I find that a little bit less than 8 looks really nice, but if you want a good quality, to make sure that everything is on the highest quality, anything higher than 8 would be preferable. Now let's go back to our console variable, which is the next setting that we added. And in here, you're gonna see it's relatively empty. What this does is we're going to be adding some console commands in order to override certain settings. So when you're working within the engine, you just do your settings as much as you can with the kind of performance that you want. However, with this type of rendering, you're not going to be doing real time. So you can kind of crank up some things to make this look a lot better, because you're not going to be doing real time performance. So in these variables, this is where we can override some values in order to help us bring that quality quite up without having to do it within the editor and get everything super slow. Now what I did is I brought you to my preset where I've already done all these variables, and I'm going to leave a link in the description below to an Unreal documentation where you can actually read a little bit more about this, and it will also let you know about all these variables that I'm using here, so you can go and copy and paste if you need to, so you don't spend all your time writing and you don't have any typos. Now that being said, the values that you see here are the values that I use to get the quality on the video that you saw on the start. Actually, that video looks really nice. It may not look as nice on YouTube because of compression, but it was really high quality. So let's talk about some of the variables and why you should use them. Now, motion blur quality, this has to do with the quality of motion blur. This doesn't have to do with the amount, so just bear that in mind. Motion build. Now we have another variable for motion blur. I find that if I don't do this variable, it will not look as good, so make sure you have this variable at 1 as well. Now this variable is if you have depth of field in your movie. If you don't have, then this variable is not going to do anything, but if you do, then this is a nice quality setting to have around 4. Now motion blur you always want to have if you are doing video, because always in reality there is at least a little bit of motion blur. Now the next one is bloom quality, very self-explanatory. Tone mapper quality. Tone mapper is the kind of like the color correction post-processing effect that Unreal has, so we also want a decent quality for that. And now we get into the ray tracing variables. So in ray tracing global illumination, you're gonna see that there's a number 1. This is the one that I need to explain. When you type in this variable, and if you're doing dynamic lighting, you need this variable in here. You are telling the engine which type of real-time ray tracing solution to use. So if you've seen my other videos, you know that there are 2 ways of doing real-time ray tracing inside Unreal. One is called Final Gather, and the other one is called Brute Force. Now brute force is the really accurate, the one that's going to be really nice looking because it's going to take into account all those nice lighting and all those shadows. Brute force is mapped in the commands to the number 1. That is why we're using the number 1 right here. There is a number 2 command which calls the final gather. The problem with the final gather is that it isn't as accurate, and again, if you've watched my video on real-time ray tracing, you'll remember that final gather does not rely on the amount of bounces. So that means if you increase the amount of light bounces in your scene, it's actually not going to increase the quality. That's why we want to use brute force, because brute force is more dependent on the amount of bounces that we have in our room. Now the next one, it's related to what I just told you, is the amount of bounces, and you can see right there on screen what the full command is. The maximum amount of bounces that we're going to get from our real-time ray tracing solution. So in this case is 2. That's a good amount of bounces for this particular scene. If you have a different kind of scene, maybe a darker scene, you may need a little bit more bounces. So again, do 1 or 2 frames to test these out and change them accordingly. Now we have the reflection part. So we want our max roughness to be 1, and we want our bounces as well, depending on what kind of quality that we want. How many bounces do you think you need in order to achieve good quality reflections? If you want to look at that, you can actually go, let's actually do that. Go into your post-processing volume, and if you scroll down, you're gonna see that you have ray tracing reflections. So right now this is turned off for performance purposes, and like I said, we're going to crank it up right here. Now in here we are going to have the number 1, so we have our max roughness all the way to 1, and our maximum bounces, we have this option right here. So if you want to see an engine, how many bounces do you need in order to get a good reflection, make sure you check out this option and increase it depending on how much quality do you need for your reflection. and then you're going to mimic that amount over here. In this case, we're just going to use 2. Now for ray tracing, reflection, shadows, again, this number is kind of the quality that we're going to get. The higher the number, the more shadows that we're going to be able to see, because this is real-time ray tracing. The lower the number, the less shadows. If you have too few shadows in your reflection, it's going to look fake, like it does if it was kind of like a video game setting. So remember, we're trying to render a high-end quality movie here. So we're going to leave that all the way to 2. Now over here, you're going to see that I have a bunch of commands that I all zeroed out. The reason why they're all 0, it means that I'm deactivating this in the engine, so they actually are not working. And for those, you can see that all of them have the word denoiser in them. The reason why I have the word denoiser in them is because these are commands that work within the engine to denoise the scene, to help make it high performance while still looking good. We don't need that denoising here, so I just took all those off because those are things that are not needed, and those are things that may be adding to our rendering times. Again, the list of these commands, it's going to be in the link that I will be leaving in the description below, so you guys can take a look at this a little bit closer. The last thing that we're going to do here is the output. So in here, there are some very self-explanatory things. The output directory, you're just going to choose which folder. So click here and a window will pop up, so you can choose which folder you want to save these in. This is how the name of the file is going to go. So it usually goes sequence name and then frame number. I recommend you leave it at this so it's easier to identify. It's always good to have the frame number in your PNG sequence so you can later load it into DaVinci, Sony Vegas, or Premiere, whatever you're using. Here we have the output resolution. Right now I'm going to use Full HD. You can change it to 4K and go crazy with this, but I'm going to leave it at Full HD. Now next to the resolution, we have custom frame rate. That is if we wanted to switch from the regular film frame rate. Unreal already gives you a 24 frames per second, which is the regular film that you will see on cinema and many movies. If you want to do something different, let's say you wanted to do 30 or you wanted to do 60, then you will have to enable that option and change it there. But for this tutorial, we're not going to do that. Override existing output. This just means that in case you need to render again, it will just override your images that you have and won't create any extra files. Now, if you click on this drop down, you're going to see something called 0 pad frame numbers. This just indicates the amount of digits that you're going to have in your frame number. So number 4 will be like it says here, 0, 0, 0, and 1. That's the amount of digits that you're going to have for your frame number. And here is where you will type your offset frame. In our case, we're starting at 0, so I'm just going to leave it there. Now, these two options are for kind of like advanced shots, so you can read this if you wanted to alter them. I'm not going to be altering them in this tutorial, but I am going to be checking use custom playback range. So I was doing some testing for different sequences here, but in here is where you're going to specify the range for your render. If you want to render the whole sequence, which the whole sequence will be from 0 to 1440 frames, you will just leave this from 0 to 1440 frames. But in my case, I'm actually going to start at 0. But if you wanted to just, let's say, do like one of these smallish sequence in order to do the test or get that small piece that you need, then you will specify that here. Alright, so once we have done that, all you have to do is click accept, and you're going to have your settings done. Now mine has a name. It has an asterisk because I did some changes to it, but yours will say probably like unknown name. So all you have to do is come here in presets, click save as, and this window will pop up and you'll save it as a regular asset. So I'm just gonna get out of here. Once we're done, all you have to do is click on render local, or render remote. Now, render remote is for those of you who have the fortune of having a render farm. A render farm is a group of computers that are going to do the rendering for you. This requires a higher level of programming and all of that, so I'm not going to touch this. What I'm going to do is click on render local, and that is going to get the process started. That is it for this video. Thank you so much for bearing with me if you made it all the way till the end. At this time, after you press render local, you just let your machine run. I do not recommend you do anything else. Your machine will be so slow you won't be able to do anything on your machine at the moment. Now, if you like this video, please leave a like, leave a comment with your questions, suggestions for future tutorials. Let me know how you plan to use this. Let me know what kind of movies you wanted to make with this. In the next video, we're going to come back to the movie render queue, and I'm going to show you how to render our super high quality image so you can do portfolio stuff. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next video.